The concept of a super soldier is nothing new to humanity. The only thing that has really changed is the path to get there. Take Beowulf, for instance. Being a man, which means he was human, he was considered the strongest warrior alive and had a strength of 30 men in his arm alone. His feats were talked about, blurring the line between man and demigod, where he fully ascended to the crazy level of respect when he takes out Grendel, or Grendel, or however you pronounce it, by literally ripping his arm off. This line of thinking has never really ended for mankind. What if we could be stronger than we are currently, create soldiers to go out, and then absolutely wipe the floor with our enemy's soldiers? While Beowulf was endowed with some sort of blessing putting him beyond man, the goal remains the same, and with it, an understanding of human anatomy and biomechanics kind of getting better, at least over the last 200 years, this may not be that too far off. One of my more favored mentions is the strength humanity actually possesses that we have kind of within our bodies, but we just don't have access to use it. The average person really only operates utilizing a fraction of what they are capable of. Contracting their muscles, roughly 40 to 50% of their strength is available to them, and even when training is unlocked, athletes and bodybuilders can really only utilize about 60 to 70%, along with people experiencing an adrenaline dump into their body during a fight or flight scenario. But we never actually access 100%, and for good reason. In fact, if every muscle in your body pulled in the same direction, it could lift 25 tons. But the point that we never actually use all of it is because muscle would tear from bone, tendons would degrade, ligaments would rip, and the strength that muscle can actually contract at would break your bones. Ergo, many corrections would have to be made to the body if you were to continuously operate around 100% strength utilized. Increasing of the density of the bone itself, connective tissue repair mechanisms overhauled, along with how the muscle actually is going to heal being the largest one. And then there's the issue of overriding the brain's own set point on what it will allow you to use. If these could be overcome, then humanity would have a chance at becoming a literal super soldier. But how could it be done? In the events of Mind Ripper, a research team funded by Genentech sets out to do just that. After finding a man in the desert, congratulations, you are being saved, do not resist. They take him back to the facility and then pump him full of a mystery virus. Well, it was trickled at first, but then ramped up much higher later. Ultimately, this creates more of a monster than a man, highlighting several changes to his internal anatomy concerning muscular, skeletal, nervous system, and new organ formation. But what exactly is this virus doing, and why is it having the impact that it is? Let's discuss that in today's episode over the colloquially referred to The Hills Have Eyes 3, but really, it's just called Mind Ripper. Also doing something new just because I can. Thank you, Drick Motka, for suggesting Mind Ripper. This was terrible. Why would you ever suggest this? I don't know. And if you would like to suggest something in the future, I'm going to keep trying to do these because I do like the engagement with you guys. It's pretty fun. If you would like to subscribe, please subscribe. If you like to like, please like, or don't. We're going to move on. We kick off our story with a giant title card of Mind Ripper. Surely it can't rip your entire mind, as 3 people carry a dude who apparently jumped off a cliffside because it looked fun to do, and there's really no other reason to look into that, YouTube mods. Don't worry about it. They then poke him with a pen light and determine, yep, he's worm food unless we, bring him back for some reason. So they carry him off into a creepy black van as the team begins talking about his status, which isn't good. Lots of blood loss, broken bones, and neurological damage to boot. They intend to inject him with the virus, which will make him inhuman. Ah yes, what could possibly go wrong? I see no issues here. Back over at the government facility, where it used to be a nuclear warehouse that is now no longer a government facility, they spared no expense, you see, because they obviously were going for stealth with this place, yet they couldn't build into the wall to park the van. I mean, it is government after all. Well, probably funded by the government, likely. What do you expect? We enter a tunnel with a very generic Genentech logo, and it's now 6 months later. Prometheus still resembles a human instead of a piece of beef jerky, so obviously the testing went well. A man is beating his bag in the back as a guy then starts breathing rather heavily. Joanne goes to take a shower, and they have cameras in the shower for some reason that you could turn off. Yes, that system wouldn't be abused at all, as then the virus man can hear her showering. Also, the camera's on a timer. What in the world? What is the purpose? You know what the purpose is. This movie needed this scene to carry it forward. So as this guy lays there, he can still hear all the conversations as well as water falling. As Joanne shows up to the break room, the dude on the couch alleges that he can see her in the shower, but she just sort of ignores that. Might want to look into that one, gal. The power then flickers because someone made the tragic mistake of firing up the microwave, as the guy shows, in fact, he is watching Joanne shower. Weirdo. So unless their relationship is more romantical than that, I mean, I watched the movie and I guess it was friendly. So, actually, it's still a bit weird though. It's odd. So as Larry complains about the government-run dump, he is in fact correct. Most government institutions are. Thanks for watching the channel. In this dissertation, I shall discuss the many failings of... So back over at Virus Man, he continues listening to all of this as they discuss his body is still accepting the virus, and once it fully does, he will completely regenerate. So first and foremost, the concept of a body accepting a virus is a bit odd. Your body will never truly accept a virus. In fact, your immune system at every turn will continue to hunt it down and destroy it given the chance. Natural killer T cells, or NKT cells, will actually cause cells to self-destruct if that cell is infected with a virus and it's producing enough interferon to warn the immune system that, hey, I'm infected. Along with that, antibodies will be produced, which will disable viruses, allowing for macrophages to clean house. So what exactly is this virus doing? Well, we will cover the changes to the anatomy here shortly, but the first thing to understand is the body will never accept this arrangement because it's not designed to. The other thing to understand is that it has always been a game of cat and mouse. Viruses have adapted to move into very sensitive tissue in your body, such as your gonads, nervous system, or fat stores in order to evade the immune system. And this is because the immune system, very much so, can absolutely stomp any disease discovered or undiscovered, at least by mankind, as its response is based on physics. Every form of antibody attaching to every form of external membrane structure is created, and all that needs to happen is for your body to recognize it. For the body to accept the virus, as these scientists have said, that would really mean that the man is on like a crazy amount of immunosuppressants, hopefully, which would then impede the adaptive immune system. But what is the adaptive immune system, I can hear you asking? Well, you have two lines of defense. The innate immune system, which is your first line. Let's say you get like a cut, right? Bacteria starts flooding in. Macrophages will respond rapidly, helping to increase inflammation, flooding the area with fluid, as they start going after anything that does not have the correct receptors on its surface, identifying it as a human cell. Upon finding a non-human cell, it will then eat it, but some of it will be left over in the battle. The dendritic cells will then pick up the pieces of these invaders, take them back to the lymph nodes, where they will display them to B cells. Because of physics and how they shape the receptors, one of those B cells is going to recognize this invader. That cell will then begin rapidly dividing, creating a ton of itself, which will then release a swath of antibodies, and this is known as the adaptive immune system, as your body is literally adapting to the invader. Also, T cells get activated, whole bunch of other, there's like a ton of things that happen, but this is basically how your antibodies get produced. So antibodies will then go on to disable the invaders as macrophages consume them, which then cleans up the problem. The process is also very similar in terms of response to viruses, but it involves more cell destruction as a natural result due to the viruses actually invading these cells. T cells will actually find infected cells and either activate apoptosis through things like engagement of the extracellular death receptors or exocytosis of cytolytic granules, forcing the cell to lyse. The body would just never accept the virus as just a mainstay and would continue to produce antibodies to it and try to take out any of the virus that existed in the open or if the cells were found to be infected. But the process sometimes cannot reach full completion. Look no further than HIV or herpes for an explanation on that. We cannot eradicate it from our bodies yet, but with gene therapy, this process may be possible in the future. So as Larry throws an apple, apparently Virus Man can hear the maggots in them as his eyes open. He is fully regenerated now. In a completely different area of the planet though, Mr. Edgy then lights matches and listens to edgy music. He accomplishes nothing. While that's going on, Wendy and Mark are like making out in this guy's house. Like, who are they? Who knows? That's the fun. So Jim opens the door asking if they are packed. Sir Edge then lights more matches and then throws them as Jim comes to check on him. He tells him to start packing up his stuff as we're all going camping. Scott is being your standard pre-adult flooded with angst as Virus Man's brain has come back online. Back over at the facility, alarms begin going off as he starts straight up going goblin mode. Joanne and Alex then have a right proper domestic over what to do as then Alex walks off. They call Jim and say, we got a serious problem over here. Apparently Jim was their team lead and he's the only one who knows how this virus is even supposed to work and at what levels it should have been administered. Excuse me? So what exactly are you guys trying to accomplish then if you don't even understand the work? Jim then hangs up on Alex as he says, I don't care. Giga Chad mode activated. Even though he discovered the virus, because profit apparently is a bad thing, he decided to walk away. Virus Man's vitals then start going off the charts allegedly, according to the charts, because if they're going off the charts, shouldn't the charts be empty? And that's your lame joke for the day. Just kidding, there's plenty more. So they go to shock Virus Man at this point as he's flatlined, hitting him with the good stuff, adrenaline and the cardiac thumping, which actually can work. But they seem to not be able to get him back, and I feel I need to explain that one real quick. So obviously, if you have a defibrillator, that is the way to go, but if someone's heart stops and you are doing CPR, occasionally you can bring them back from death by balling up your fist and bringing it down over their heart as hard as possible. It will occasionally jolt the heart with enough force to restart it. Of course, this runs along the same chances as you getting hit in that area in between heartbeats, and then your heart stopping as a result. So it shouldn't be relied upon, but in times of desperation when there are literally no other alternatives, it has been shown that it can work. So giving up, Alex tells Joanne to shut up, as then they take off their PPE. You're gonna learn to hate Alex. So that virus is still contagious, right? So as the fluid begins draining with them walking away, they officially have a heartbeat. So that virus is still transmissible, right? The power then goes off as they see Virus Man is gone. Oh no. Hopefully he doesn't start ripping minds.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
As the power then flickers back on, he jumps up screeching as he grabs the first guy and then he yells, oh no, he's ripping my mind. And then Lair Bear over here gets grabbed Jurassic Park style, yelling, shoota! Truly, we could have never prevented this brain-tearing situation. Back over at Jim's Jamboree and Camping Fun, he calls off the trip as something has come up, such as the life of a scientist. We can't help that microbiological scientists are like the bad boys of science. It's just how it has to be sometimes. Also unrelated, but marine biologists are huge dorks in the science world. Not buying that? Look, it might be self-reported, but microbiology is a superior science. Anyhow, absolutely correct and in no way bias at all statements aside, the team then argues about what they should do as Alex says he needs help catching Virus Man. Alex goes on to say that they were wearing those suits to protect him as they're contagious and he's not. Listen, I'm not saying that's really stupid, I'm just heavily implying it, and unless you put this guy on some heavy immunosuppressants, which is, I guess, always possible, his virus is still contagious. So, lock and loading Brides of Christ, the team agrees to help, under duress. Meanwhile, flying over the desert in Jim's family annihilation plane, his kids don't want to bond with him. His son in particular kinda sucks. Bond with me, Scotty. Back in the lab, Alex, stop aiming that thing at your teammates, dude. Like, they get the point. So they make spears with needles on them because they're just going to inject Virus Man with, I assume, sedatives as Jim flies overhead. Alex, being the real hero, protects the rear while Joanne and Rob take point. Fearfully, of course. Rob then turns on Alex, but that counterattack goes about as well as a wet fart in church. Nice job, brother. So Jim lands his plane in the middle of the desert as they all exit. Is this where they're camping? Surely not. Jim then gets out and says that he needs to check on the Gentech as the hunt for the Virus Man continues below. Opening a door, Rob then enters, finding a man's mind has been ripped. Mind ripper. Yes, the stupid joke will continue throughout the video. Thanks for watching. Looking at the duct, Alex then orders them to check it. Bro, Alex just totally sucks. Joanne agrees to look because Rob won't do it, risking her own mind in the process. Seeing nothing except the grudge woman up there, she then turns further, and as she does, she sees some rodents snacking on some eyeball jelly. Delicious. Back out on the plane, Jim then tells them to wait there while he checks out the secret government organization building that spared no expense, except for a garage to hide their vehicle. Now, maybe this is a private organization, but somehow, I don't believe it. Government grants minimum to keep this place running. So Jim's son follows him as they have a father-son talk about how Scott kind of sucks and Jim is cool. I mean, that's how you should talk to your edgy son, right? Scott isn't about it though, so he just sort of nopes out of there. Meanwhile, Virus Man is having some nice convulsions, like that time it was oyster night at a gas station in Kansas. I was really hungry and really dumb in my 20s. What can I say? So, what I actually can't say is, like me, he starts violently throwing up. So Mark and Wendy are sort of walking off as Mark is thinking with a smaller brain the entire time. Like, bro, it's the desert, sand gets everywhere. It's one of those things when you're out at the beach, you're like, hey, this will be a great time. It's not. It's sand, it's coarse, it gets everywhere. Unless you're into like extreme exfoliation, which I wouldn't recommend. So Wendy denies his advances as he sulks in the back for a moment before Jim shows up breaking up this premarital relation. Mark needs to go and just take care of that because this man is like lethal levels of thirsty. Just go find a rock to sit behind for a minute, bro. But back at the government facility of mandated fun, Alex continues being a tool, which is fairly predictable, as their alien tracker appears to be tracking Virus Man. How exactly is it tracking him? Well, if I recall correctly, they said it's tracking his virus levels. Yes. All right then. That seems like real science and in no way a ripoff of Alien. An alien He's on his way down to the air duct to say hello as he starts crawling like a leaper after them. As they keep running from him, Alex goes to get the door open as they don't hear Virus Man anymore. Alex decides that they're just gonna stay here instead, which is actually kind of interesting. Like self-sacrifice for the greater good of the outside? Likely not, probably just profit-driven, what am I saying? But because of this decision, of course he gets grabbed and pulled up by his arm as they stand underneath the same vent, just hanging out, that Alex just got pulled up into Dead Space style. Very smart. Returning back to entry, Jim decided to bring the whole fam damnly as his hand is accepted for entry. Seems like a bit of a security oversight, doesn't it? Guess they never got around to updating who has access to this secret underground nuclear bunker. Definitely a government facility. Heading inside, they then miss the broken grate above them as they approach the slightly off-center Gentek logo on the door. You thought I didn't notice. No expense spared. Back in the computer area, Joan and Rob, or Joanne, or I don't know what her name is. It doesn't really matter because this movie was The Hills Have Eyes 3. Anyways, they're looking for a way out as Jim and his family still haven't run into anyone yet. Should be slightly concerning, right? Unless it's Friday, after 2 p.m. Watching the vents, Rob and Joanne then make their way down the hallway, keeping an eye out, hearing groaning in the vents. Mark has entered the vents. They then find a random vent that releases the radioactive materials, and because, of course, that's down here with them, like they wouldn't have done anything with that after passing this off to Gentek, right? Why would we clear our workspace of literal nuclear radiation? That's crazy. He then breaks the door lock as a pipe falls and then starts leaking radioactive waste everywhere. Very good. Hope you didn't want children, bro. Looking up, they see their escape, but a nuclear barrel is in the way. The barrel then drops, heading towards them, which for some reason was surprising to Rob as they retreat as one of the barrels breaks, blocking the exit. So as the family continues walking, Scott kind of stops Mark to talk about Siegfried and Roland. I have no idea what this was about. I'm sure it has something to do with something, but I've watched it like 4 times now, and I still don't know. I must have missed something. Anyways, as Joanne and Rob retreat back to the radio room, nobody is answering. No expense spared. Except on the weekends, of course. That's when we're sparing lots of expenses. You're on your own then. Good luck, Cairo. So Rob then kisses Joanne, securing his workplace harassment lawsuit as Alex wakes up getting smacked by Virus Man. Hugging himself, since no one else is doing it, he says things are happening to him as the Kansas oysters come back up once more. They do be doing that. Looking at Alex, oh sweet lord, his irises are yellow. The werewolf is coming inside him. Also, his tongue has a proboscis. Yeah, I reckon you are changing after all, aren't you? He says that it needs to be fed, it feeds on brains. It rips them. Alex then says, you just need some steroids and I can save you. Going on to say, Virus Man, you need me. So they share a moment as then he says, oh, lend me your mind. And then going through his eye, mine ripped, brother. So first and foremost, we can see some of the physical changes have happened within the body and are now presenting on the outside. Obviously, the changing of the iris color would denote that the melanin of the 2 populations of melanin-producing cells of the eyes, that being the neural crest melanocytes and the neuroepithelial cells of the iris pigment epithelium. Basically, the iris as you see it, and it would be altered to produce this new melanin. But how might this be possible? Well, it's clear that this virus was implanted into the body of Virus Man, which, given the name, you probably already figured out. But he's also known as Thor, and it was for one purpose, gene editing to create a super soldier. Now, much like how we use gene editing with our foods early on by just exposing them to radiation and chemicals, which in turn altered their genomes, this was completely random and you would never really know what sort of adaptations would be imposed upon the genetic structure of the food. And this can be viewed similarly to how this genetic approach to the super soldier project kind of all took place. The virus was injected into the body of this man where it was clearly a retrovirus. A retrovirus, of course, being an RNA virus that utilizes its own enzymes of reverse transcriptase to integrate into the genome of a host. Now, the thing about this is, this function allows for it to implant its own genome, which is critical to understanding how it's actually going to work. But if you were to take some of the desirable genes and integrate those into the virus, then those genes would implant into the host genome as well. And this is fundamentally how controlled gene editing can be conducted. Now, extrapolating that out, clearly this is easier said than done. You're talking about 36 trillion cells being in the average adult male's body. As a result, the virus must be plentiful, and again, every step of the way, you will have the body actively fighting and destroying the viruses in order to protect itself. Some of the virus will be successful in altering the genome of a person, but it would be a very slow process overall, and ultimately, if enough cells were not infected, or the body became too resistant to the virus by releasing antibodies, you kind of think of this like a vaccine sort of deal, then the gene editing tool would be fundamentally useless. And this would also be why it would take so long for the Virus Man to change, seeing as he was exposed to low doses at first, likely not to send his body into a full-on fight for survival. However, when Alex took over, this process changed, and he was pumped full of the virus. Now, the virus itself is a bit odd. As will be made mention later, they only recently just discovered it, along with what appears to be a much more, aggressive type of virus concerning its gene editing ability. Not to mention, what it is coding for does not appear to be a homegrown Earth classic. And for that, we need to understand where viruses come from. The reality is, we don't. We think that they predate Luca or the last universal common ancestor, over 4 billion years ago, which brings up some interesting questions and wild speculations from yours truly. The generalized thinking of viruses is that they somehow arose as mobile genetic elements that gain the ability to move between cells. From here, they remained free living. And if you can call it living, depends on what kind of scientist you ask. I don't really think viruses are living personally, but that's just me. But they would become something that is similar to a parasite. There is some speculation that viruses are actually what caused life to evolve into multicellular, as cells in some capacity began behaving like viruses. The thinking is that a virus implanted its genome into a prokaryote where its behavior would then take over the cell itself, and then it just became altered. We can kind of see a modern day example of this proposed idea anyways, concerning sperm in an egg. A sperm literally invades an egg, which is virus behavior. But again, what's most interesting is life here seemed to be functioning just fine, and then viruses arose, which changed everything. Then you gotta ask yourself, if the cell evolved afterwards and the virus was already there, how did life even get a foothold if viruses are just wrecking everything? Like, for instance, while in the past, obviously cataclysmic events are quite regular, it's interesting to see how life was pretty stable and remained good to go. Viruses either arose before or arose shortly after, and now every single day, 40% of the ocean's bacteria is absolutely annihilated by viruses. To be honest with you, this type of interaction almost sounds like an invasion, which that's pretty much what viruses specialize in. So the wilder speculation of all this is that life on Earth was already here, and some sort of impact with another body, whether it been an asteroid or meteorite, comet, whatever, contained frozen, again, parentheses, life. These viruses, having been held in this frozen capsule, after making contact on Earth, found organisms that it was actually able to infiltrate and control. We actually see something similar with the melting permafrost on Earth right now, releasing megaviruses that are tens of thousands of years old and actually quite large. Sounds scary, but what really matters if it can infect modern life or not. Like, for instance, I'm not really worried about Dutch Elms disease that infects trees, so it might not even affect humans, but it's really just a happy little accident. And that's why after viruses arose, while there are variations, they don't really seem to have changed all that much, while life has drastically changed over 4 billion years. Now, what are the odds of something like that out there having a similar genetic structure to life here? Fairly low. But that's why it's put in the wilder speculation category. Either way, this virus used by Genentech doesn't appear to hold the genome of something that resides on Earth, and something is imprinted in its genome that is traveling with it, which may sound odd, but really, the human genome has snippets of it sometimes encoded into viruses all the time, and then when that virus infects another person, that snippet of your genome can be transferred to their cell, and so on and so forth. So if the same principle applies to this virus, then something is imprinted into its genome of itself that is then passed along to VirusMan. Or it may be that the virus is actually encoding for specific organs, which we'll kind of get to in a second, but this has cascading consequences, which we'll talk about later. So Jim and his family continue to explore a clearly abandoned workplace as Rob finds a grain silo to climb up. Heading up the ladder, his foot then gets grabbed by VirusMan. Assumedly, his foot gets bit. Ow, that's annoying. Emerging out the top, he then pulls out the old force multiplier, ready to turn this into a real party. Limping his way down the hallway, Joanne then calls out as he answers on a computer terminal, "Quick, save your progress, bro." And as he does though, VirusMan emerges from the vent. Using the door as a shield, Rob can't aim worth a damn, and then he's instantly mind ripped through the nose. Nice. Entering the lab, Scott looks at some weird thing in the safety cabinet as his daughter yells at Jim for his work. Listen, Wendy, these weird little things in there might be completely necessary to creating something way worse, so let's not be too hasty and judge. Also, VirusMan is losing those luxurious locks. The march of time is relentless, brother. So as Scott listens to his screamo, VirusMan begins hearing it through the pipes, and going necro mode, he begins hunting once more. So while all that crap is happening, somehow Mark calling out to Wendy is not heard by VirusMan, and he's right next to him, like he was standing right there. But the music several rooms away playing through a headphone, that's somehow going through the pipes and you can hear that. Alright then. So Mark then goes to talk to Wendy, saying it's not your dad's fault. He just had to do those crimes. Again, Wendy, you don't really know enough to know what's happening here, so let's not jump to conclusions. But what do I know? So Mark and Wendy then share a moment as they both go to leave. VirusMan is still going absolutely goblin mode in the vents as Scott walks off and Wendy and Mark run into Joanne. She tells them to follow her as Scott finds the nicer break room. Joanne then enters the lab calling out for Jim, but he's gone and so is Scott. VirusMan then loses track of Scott momentarily as his radio runs out of battery as Jim continues his own search. Helping himself to the microwave, he then shuts down the power to the facility as Jim finds a mind-ripped person. Above Scott, however, Virus Man is lurking. Jim begins running back to the break room now as Virus Man descends, approaching Scott. The microwave then beeps, freaking the dude out as Jim puts a knife in his back. Back ripped. Virus Man then runs after Jim, grabbing him human shield style as Joanne approaches with a pellet dispenser. Tracking him, she then fires off a shell but misses. Nice job. Jim is then dragged up to VM's lair as Joanne immediately is like, well, we tried everything we can. We can't do anything else for him. Really? Like, he's currently being dragged up and you guys are just kind of watching. Like, it's not happening that fast. Why not give chase? Joanne then asks about the knife as then she grabs both countermeasures for herself. It's a little selfish there, gal. So Jim is being dragged off by Virus Man, leaving everyone behind. So like, why not mind rip now? We got time for it. Joanne says that regenerated tissue is making him stronger. The medical benefits of this would have been amazing. So as Virus Man approaches him, he says he remembers him from somewhere. He begins asking if he's like him. Virus Man is hurting, but Jim made him live. Okay, and then we get the age-old question. VM asks if Jim is a god, and whenever anything or anyone asks you if you're God or you are a god, especially if this thing is like mind-ripping people, you always say yes. You can patch things up with the god later. So VM then asks if the youngling is important to him, and he says, oh, it's my son. Also, VM's face is definitely altering. Back down in the lab, Joanne begins saying the virus regenerated his lost arm. Wendy asks what gives her the right. The law of finders keepers, obviously. Wendy then goes on talking about how she would hear her parents arguing about Joanne. Wendy, you are jumping to a lot of conclusions here, gal. So VM asks why Jim just didn't let him meet his end when he jumped. And Jim tells him, I got worse news. You're actually not able to be killed. You will live for thousands of years and eventually the sun will explode. Bummer, bro. So VM continues saying things are happening to him as then he rips his ears off as he assumes them to be cringe. He then rips off his own hair. No, you're gonna want that hairline if you're gonna live for 1,000 years, bro. And from here, I think we have enough information to make a few assumptions about this creature. Clearly, VM was on a trickle of the virus, which slowly over time caused him to heal. How this was likely accomplished is it would go beyond just the cyclin genes of man, which are associated with mitosis. The genome that was implanted into his own genetic structure would have likely also influenced the mitotic pathways of the cell, as well as doubling up on those, except one would likely be very alien in origin. The alien genome would likely not respond to the same limiting factors that a human genes would, and as a result, this new mitotic pathway unlocked the ability of regeneration. This would imply that the virus likely contained several genes and large segments of foreign coding. Again, it was discovered only recently, and they had no idea where it came from. From here, the alien genome could kickstart mitosis controlling the cell rather than being controlled, and as a result, information containing original limb structure and endpoints would be assessed, which meant that VM could actually regrow limbs. And we know this exists right now in the human genome, we just don't know how to turn on certain genes so that you can regenerate lost limbs. So this regeneration goes beyond just regrowing limbs, however. In general, repair of tissues such as muscular, neurological, skeletal, all this would be increased and the tissue itself would be bolstered. This in turn would allow for VM to quite literally pack on new muscle strands, making him stronger than your average human. Humans typically, by the first week of postnatal development, will have all the muscle strands that they are going to have. And while these can enlarge, and obviously they do because I'm larger than when I was a youngling, new ones cannot be formed. Adding new strands would increase the overall contracting force, which in turn would mean that bones and connective tissues must be stronger as well. And considering we would be getting new muscle strands, it's not too far-fetched to assume that the connective tissue would be doubled up along with the bone density, which always fun, but there are humans out there who have double bone density right now. And it's unconfirmed, but I've always thought maybe, possibly I have this, as I should have broken bones several times over by now, but never really have. Like, it's been actually pretty great. And really the only way you would know is like you sink a little more quickly and when you swim. And in general, for my size, I'm just heavier, as bones are quite heavy. It'd be interesting to see one day if that's the case. So as we look at his face, we can also see phenotypic traits beginning to form that would be considered abnormal by any measure on this planet. More so when it's coming from a virus, further indicating that this specific virus is not from Earth, and what is seeded into this genome is not from here either. This genome also appears to be extremely stable and may in effect code for its own genetic stabilizing elements. In humans, DNA polymerases check their work to to make sure no genes have been altered. This process is not 100% effective, however, hence why out of 36 trillion cells in the average man, even if the process is 99.99% effective, issues can still arise. And this is because roughly every 7 years, your cells completely regenerate apart from your neurons. So if your average lifespan for an adult male in the US is roughly about 77 years, which is also kind of sad because that means for the first time in a long time, it's gone down instead of up because we keep eating too much. But that means you are pretty much going to regenerate yourself 11 times. So 11 multiplied by 36 trillion gives you 396 trillion cells roughly in your lifetime. Multiply that by 0.0001, and that gives your body a probable chance of screwing up over 39,600,000,000 times. And you can see why we age. Genetic damage is quite plentiful. So if this alien coding can code for a gene checker, so to speak, that is even just at 99.999% effective at its job, then that drops that buildup of genetic damage from 39,600,000,000 to just 3,096,000,000. Now, that's still arguably a lot, but you have to remember the virus doesn't make you immortal, it just appears to dramatically slow the buildup of gene errors by fixing them as it's implanted its own mitotic genes in the process. By comparison, as long as my math is working, by the time you're about 28, you likely have had roughly 14,400,000,000 potential gene errors. So with this new genome checking ability, by the time you are 77 after you're infected with this, their genes may have well just barely been 8 years old. Holy hell, that was a lot of math. But now you get it. Basically, this would be a breakthrough unlike anything we have ever seen. So grabbing Jim, Mr. Stabby comes out as it cuts away before we see what happened. Oh, I wonder if he survived. Joanne then checks the computer and sees a lot of cells are regenerating. She goes on to say that he needs cholesterol, otherwise the virus continues to eat away at him. Yes, interesting. What does that even mean? Let's discuss. So essentially, this one is relatively easy, but the viral envelope contains a specific amount of cholesterol. This cholesterol is important to the virus being able to invade cells. Because Virus Man is absolutely saturated with this virus, we can assume his body is producing a lot of them, necessitating a consumption of a rather large amount of cholesterol to fuel these viral numbers. If he were to stop consuming cholesterol, the viruses would then essentially degrade his body to the point because they would deplete all of his own reserves. Once his reserves were gone, the body can no longer make vitamin D, hormones like testosterone and estrogen, and fat-dissolving bile acids. Membranes on cells would begin to erode until eventually it results in the end of the equilibrium the body has established, so essentially it becomes so disrupted he crashes out. And the reasoning behind him wanting specifically brains, I hate to say it, but it does make a lot of sense, because this organ contains roughly 20% of your entire body's cholesterol, roughly 23 milligrams per gram of tissue. So let's say the brain is at a midpoint of 1,350 grams. Usually the human brain is between 1,300 and 1,400 grams. That is 31,050 milligrams of cholesterol in your brain. By comparison, a fast food burger at its highest point usually has around 150 milligrams of cholesterol, and at its lowest around 60. So you can eat one brain or 207 to 517 burgers. You can see why he chooses brains. So running down the stairs, evidently it's cold down there, as you can see everyone rubbing their arms. And actually, fun fact for you, that's the worst thing you can do. Your arms lose heat really fast. Rub the sides of your chest. That'll impart more heat, warming you faster. Your arms will take care of themselves. Mark is then given a hammer and a screwdriver to begin hitting a pipe as Joanne goes to talk to Wendy. Joanne was in love with Jim, she finally admits it, but Jim stuck with his wife, as one should. Loyalty over strange, am I right? Joanne got butthurt when Jim left the project as a result, because he's like, listen, I know you're into me, but I'm out. Wendy then says thanks as they start really crappily setting up cameras. So VM continues running his hands over his bald head, which is the perfect time to tell you today's episode is sponsored by Keeps. It's actually not. So now he's completely bald because he didn't address the problem before it got worse, as the rest of the squad starts leaving trails of brains. Mine's just ripe for the ripping. As they descend further into the facility, VM has smelled the trail of brains, and really, he's just found them as a result because he followed the brains. Nice plan. Grabbing Joanne, he then snaps her neck like a chicken wing, as then he takes out both Scott and Marky Mark in the Funky Bunch. Grabbing Wendy, she touches his head as, Ayo, she's one of them. Except psych, it was a dream. A really stupid dream. Because he's even yet to meet these people. How did he know who they were? This movie's a bunch of cliches, isn't it? So as they run, they then trip VM. Somehow this knocks him out of the game. That's all you had to do the whole time was trip him. As then they turn on the camera. As he approaches the door, he holds as he looks around and then finds a brain on the ground. Ripping into that mine, he then goes for the next. And at the end, one of man's greatest traps ever created exists. a box with a pile of brains under it attached to a string. Well, maybe. As he approaches the door, which is basically an opening to a box and a freezer, they open the door and then send Joanne and Mark in to shut it. Wendy kisses him, saying to be careful, as he's like, "Oh, that's the first time you've made a move on me. Listen, Mark, hit on her later. Time is pressing here, brother." So Joanne and then Mark approach the door as they slowly close it, but oh no, VM is out there with them. Joanne gets thrown like a baby in a dryer, while Mark attacks with rebar, which does absolutely nothing. VM then grabs Mark and turns his head around 180 degrees, as Joanne then fires some rounds into VM before knocking him into the freezer. And then the temperature starts dropping further. VM starts healing almost immediately, pushing out the pellets, which gives a pretty sweet idea, as he's totally okay. Maybe use that on Mark. It's probably too late. He's leaking spinal fluid at this point. So now they don't really know what to do. Rob then asks if they're just supposed to wait until he comes out of there and rips all of their minds, as VM has a nice freak out on the door. So back in the break room, the Offspring looks more bored than anything. Scott's having a breakdown as his edgy exterior was all just a ploy. He's really a big baby. Figured as much. Joanne has an idea as she approaches Scott. VM, meanwhile, is looking around for what appears to be an exit out of the freezer, I guess. Exiting the break room, Joanne says that they need to find their father, as his hand is the only way out of there. Heading down the hallway, they do indeed find Alex. Why not take his hand? Couldn't he get out earlier? And then they find Jim just sort of laying there, checking him. Seriously, nobody checks his pulse. So Scott is like, "I'll do it. I'll shoot off his hand." So he starts yelling at his dad to be a man and get up. Just check his pulse. See if he's still breathing. I don't know. Do literally one thing to see if he's actually alive. Anyways, Jim then wakes up as he reports that his leg is broken as they go to get him out of there. Meanwhile, VM is literally, he tore a pipe out of the concrete wall, and Joanne tells Jim Alex was pumping him up with a ton of viruses. Very smart. VM has now broken out. Looking down the hallway, he necromorph jump scares them before carrying off Wendy. Scott says the microwave freaked him out, so sound must affect VM for some reason. Wendy then went unconscious. Your guess is as good as mine as to why she was freaking out when she got grabbed. And then waking back up, yeah, this is awkward. Carrying her back to his lair, he just sort of yeets her, unnecessary, as Mr. Stabby exits his mouth. He pokes her with it, phrasing, except then he stops. Jim gets the power back on as Scott yells in the PA, inducing massively painful noise because of his voice, as Scott actually does something and then electrocutes Mr. Stabby as he runs in. Ouchies. So the proboscis, at least from what I can tell, is definitely a symptom of a genome imparted by this virus, which sort of makes sense. While mind ripping, it would actually be sucking up the cholesterol to fuel the virus that is contained within VM. This may indicate that this is a new organ being created, and it has a sole purpose to act as a sort of a second stomach to increase the viral load in the body in order to spread. Now, with this, clearly this would indicate that the virus itself can grow organs, and this would put this outside of these standard viruses that evolved on Earth, meaning that this is in fact an alien virus. Now, the real question comes up concerning, is this a genome that is somehow affected by an alien race that then got transferred here, or is this just 100% virus that holds enough genetic information to severely alter a host? I believe it's the latter over the former. The virus itself is inducing structures to grow within the body of any host in order to better sustain itself. It in turn will bolster the host with things like super strength or super hearing by doubling up the hairs in their ears, but I do see one issue that the virus has unintentionally caused. The intelligence of VM appears to be severely altered, and I believe I have an explanation for this. Seeing as his other cells are altered, going from a skinny dude to a behemoth, upon the virus being increased so quickly in his system at the direction of Alex, I would go out on a limb and say it had an impact on the brain. At first, while he could talk and his outward appearance was somewhat changing, as it kept going, so did his ability to communicate. What we are seeing is the consequences of neurons dividing in his brain. The human brain is sort of at a delicate precipice. While it can grow marginally more larger than it is now with no ill effects, you begin to have two issues arise if it keeps growing: communication lag and heat generation. Doubling up on neurons would not make you more intelligent. If anything, it would slow down your ability to think, as the firing of neurons would have to go through double the tissue. And this may also not allow for the brain to adequately cool itself either, inducing other issues like aggression and depression, as neurons have altered behavior as they are becoming too hot. Essentially, what you are seeing is VM become less and less capable and more animalistic as he falls back on instincts because his cerebrum becomes over-encumbered by the growing neuronal tissue. This is also why his head appears to start swelling. The skull appears to be compensating somewhat for the increase of presence of neurological tissue. The first hint that this is actually taking place is when he is able to hear everyone around him. The sensitivity to sound and light would imply more information is coming in than normal due to available nervous tissue reporting in. As a result, sound and light might be overpowering for him. That is until literally what is about to happen. Running for the front door, it reads Jim's hands as they all exit the facility. Heading to the creepy van, surely this piece of crap is going to start. Oh, it does. Nice. Taking off, well, that's everyone else's problem now, I guess. As Joanne drives, she tells him what happened to the team, as then she starts having a nice cry about it. But as they go, VM can apparently run insanely fast as Jim puts a shot through the roof. And then jumping onto the back of the van, breaking through the window, here's Johnny style. Scott gets grabbed, but they tell him to get out of the way like he's grabbed, right? He's being held onto. It's really hard to get out of the way when somebody's grabbing you like that. But then he starts cutting off Mr. Stabby, and if I think everybody can relate, well, most people, I think half the population can relate. If you get a comparable thing cut off, you're probably going to let go of what you're holding onto too. So they ignite the van, gee, nice shot there, Wendy, and then run over to the plane as Scott says, I'm going to fly. Getting it started, Scott fishtails that bad boy around and takes off, leaving the abomination that they have wrought on the earth to expire in the desert. Very good. Except psych, VM is literally on the plane too now. He grabs Joanne as he tries to mind rip her, as she then puts a shot out and he drops to the ground below. Except psych, I'm just kidding. So of course we all know that isn't gonna take him out. The dude regenerates. Moving down to him, it's just like before when he jumped, except this time he's been eating Factor, so he's swole. So as they pan over him, his hand moves, indicating predictably he's still alive. Nice. And thus concludes Mind Ripper. The virus appears to hold a genome completely alien to Earth, while doing excellent things like repairing tissue, once thought lost, regrowing limbs, increasing strength and bone durability, overhauling life through genetic repair, as well as potentially being a way forward to slightly increase brain size, which could potentially lead to more intelligent people. The reality is, it's kind of similar to how we originally created genetically modified food. We just threw stuff at the wall to see what would stick. Now the process has become more refined, and if this process were conducted under the same progression, then in the future, it would be a massive medical breakthrough, maybe even a medical revolution. But for now, it's just a bald guy who really enjoys eating brains. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be baller of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. Mainly because this was also a fairly long one. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where this week we are talking about the many missing people in Yosemite National Park and how we just can't seem to find anybody. Very scary, actually. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer. Thank you, bro. Next, I'd like to thank our scientists, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations B-Grade Horror Movies, Dakota23, Lucian Dragon Metric System, and Trash Panda in a Trench Coat. Thank you guys as well. And to the rest of my patrons, I appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out, and you guys are a bunch of cool guys. But that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.